We're back out here at the Big Lake once again, and today we're talking about some of the best and easiest ways of locating those late fall bass. And when I find them, some of my favorite lures and presentations. Stick around, you don't want to miss this one. There we are. Oh, that feels good. Oh, that feels real good. It is real good. Come here, buddy. And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing, and as you can see, it is a terrible day out here on the Big Lake. It's windy, it's rainy, there's a chill in the air, and those fish, well, they're kind of in a funk. Just the other day, we were at 84, 85 degrees, and now we are back to being cold. That's part of fishing in the fall, and this is going to be more the normal than the exception moving forward as we get deeper into fall and into winter. We're not going to turn the corner here until probably sometime in mid-January, late January, as we move into February. That's when the temperatures are going to finally start to warm up. And for the biggest part of the country, that's probably not going to be until March or even April, depending on how far north you are. But what does that mean for bass fishing? Well, there's still great ways to come out here and catch a limited bass. Some days you might have to fight for it a little bit more. Some days are going to be a little bit easier. It all depends upon, the bass's behavior and how easily you can locate them. And for me, well, I know this lake very well, so I know it inside and out. I know where those bass are going to be at any given time of the year. And right now, they have moved from the northern part of the lake to the southern part of the lake, and that's where they like to winter. Now, granted, that's only a few miles. That's 3 or 4 miles on this lake. I call it the Big Lake, but it's only about 640 acres, so, that's not very far for bass to travel. But that doesn't mean that they're still not going to be roaming around some, especially on those days when they're going to be chasing that bait fish, which they're still doing, and they're still doing on a lot of fisheries. So that's one of the things that we want to look for very first and foremost. We want to look for those telltale signs. As I always say, as we know, find signs of life first. And the biggest sign of life that you can see is bass chasing those bait fish. Whether those bait fish are rolling on the surface, meaning the bass are actively feeding on them, or whether you see bass busting on the surface, which is an indication that those bass are actually slapping into them. That's important because that dictates the type of bait we want to throw. We've talked about it before. When those bass are chasing bait fish, you see those little bait fish just kind of darting over the surface, topwater is going to be your best option. Something like a spook, something like a buzzbait. You can work it fairly fast as those bass, they roam around. We've talked about this. I've shown you examples of this. Now, when those bass are busting up on those bait fish, that means that they're slamming into them. They are slapping into them. And while you can use topwater, you'll get blow-ups, but chances are you won't hook into a lot of fish because the bass aren't trying to swallow it as much as they're trying to just run into it, stun that bait fish, come back around, and inhale them. So a good presentation to use during a time like that is going to be, a jerkbait. Right now. Now is when we are getting into the hardcore jerkbait time of the year. This is the time when everybody thinks about fishing a jerkbait, and with good reason. A jerkbait is probably going to shine more than any other type of presentation. These mimic those dying bait fish. You've heard me say it a million times. This is exactly what those bass are looking for. So if you're having trouble getting bites, if you're having trouble locating those bass, first thing you want to do, look for signs of life. Those bass have usually moved up deeper into creek channels and pockets on this time of year. If you can find shallow water, if you can find an area where it's going to warm up in the sun relatively early, that's going to be prime real estate for those bass. And when you see that, pay attention to how those bass are reacting. Pay attention to what they're doing. That, like we said, is going to dictate what you're going to throw and how you're going to work it. But this guy right here, this is going to be your safest bet. You can probably get a good portion of your bites just by working one of these. But as we've talked about before, we want to have a 1-2 punch. We want to be able to follow that up. Keep those bass guessing, keep things different, keep things where they're fresh. So those bass can't ever get accustomed to, get keyed in on, and get used to those baits that we are throwing. So I like to change things up. I like to have an A and a B, a main bait that I'm throwing and a follow-up bait, or, a 1-2 punch. I like to think of it more in that way. And when it comes to a jerkbait, well, I'm following it up with a soft plastic jerkbait. I talked about this one in the last video, a very finesse type of soft plastic jerkbait. I've got this on a 1/0 EWG hook, and I've got it on my spinning combo, 10-pound braid to a 6-pound fluorocarbon leader. And the reason why I'm fishing it that way is because I want to be extra finessey. We've got to match the mood of those fish. We've got to match the energy level of those fish. You've heard me say it before. And one way to do that is by being extra slow, extra finessey. And we can do the same thing with that hard jerkbait. As I've talked about before, we've talked about slowing it down, giving it a couple of jerks, and then letting it pause for 15 or 20 seconds. And in the comment section, you guys have been telling me that those tips have really been working well for you, that being slower with the jerkbait, working it on the pause, has done wonders for you. But we're not going to leave out something like topwater. Like we've said, topwater can still be very plentiful out here. There are days, even on a day like today, I was able to get some bites with this guy right here, an old yellow devil's horse. Old school as it gets, if you want to talk about a prop type topwater bait. And we've got a lot of wind, we've got a lot of waves, and it's been rainy off and on today. And that temperature is down about 30 degrees from where it was just a couple of days ago. And I got some really nice blow-ups on this. So don't rule out something like topwater. You never know. They may be in a mood to bust up on that. If you're seeing bluegill or minnows or shad or shiner or goby or alewife or whatever the prey species is in your particular area, if you can visually identify that they're in the area, I promise you there is a population of bass that is not so far away. They're pretty close by. And topwater may just be what activates them. You may not get a bite. You may just get a blow up. They'll slap at it and they'll miss. But you know what? Now you know those bass are there. You've got them to reveal themselves. And that's a trick that I use. It's one of the tips that I've been using for years. It's kind of how I was fishing with this today. I got a couple good blow-ups on it now. I didn't really hook in. I hooked into one, a little bitty guy, but what I mainly used it for was to let me know those bass were there. And then I could come back behind it with something like this. This is a Berkley slobber knocker, and I've got a Yum spine crawl on the back end of it. This was my, my go-to bait. So what I would do is I would use the topwater to get them to reveal themselves, and then I would throw back in with this, and that's how I could get the bites. That's how I was able to generate strikes today. As we've said, A, B, 1-2 punch. And it's great to think in terms of that. If you can find presentations that work on your fishery, that complement each other, that you can work, it's not just about having one that's fast or having one that's slow. You can have 2 fast presentations. You can have 2 slow presentations, but it's presentations that work well together, that complement each other. And another presentation that it was working well for me today, good old Texas rigged worm. The thing that you're noticing, the theme that you're noticing about these baits that I'm using, they're not complicated, right? We're going out there with basic stuff and we're keeping it simple. We're not throwing a whole bunch of hullabaloo at these bass. We're keeping it simple because those bass, their energy level is down. They don't have the energy with that colder water to chase down something that's, going to give them a lot of problems. I'm not burning crankbaits right now. I'm not burning square bills or lipless. Doesn't mean that I can't use them, and I like using a silent crank this time of year. A tight wobbling silent crank is another great option that I can use, in place of this. If I wanted to replace this and change things up, I could grab a Fritz side, or I could grab, something like an Ott's Garage or something along those lines, something that's a balsa bait, a Bagley balsa bait, something that's got a really tight wobble in the water, something that's not going to create a whole bunch of disturbance, but something those bass will still key in on. As I said, A, B, make sure they complement each other. That's what works the best. So whenever you're out and about, you go out to your fishery and you're looking around, make sure that you are looking for signs of life. Pay attention to what time of year it is and where those bass are going to be. Right now, they're going to be moving back into those backs of the creek arms. They're probably about 2/3 of the way back, or a little bit better depending on your fishery. On my fishery here in the deep south, they're about halfway in, so they're not quite that far back, but they're going to be before it's all said and done. They're going to be on the southern part of the lake, and they're going to be moved back into those creek arms. It's just how they do. That's where the prey species are. That's where the water gets warmest, fastest, and we're still not ruling out that northern bank. If you get a chance to have some sun or a sunny day, target that northern bank, and I'm telling you, you will have great success, because those bass they'll be looking for those warmer spots. So if you can find rocks, if you can find riprap, a riprap bank near a bridge, dock pilings or something like that, whenever that sun exposes itself, especially in the morning, and it can warm that northern bank, that south-facing bank, I'm telling you, those are going to be gold mines deep into the winter. And you can work something like a jerkbait along them. And even topwater, even now I'm catching them on a buzzbait and I'm catching them on a spook. But like I said, a lot of the things that I am doing is I'm using a topwater bait to get them to reveal themselves. So you can do little tricks like that. So once you've located the fish, it's not that hard. Then use baits that complement each other, that work well together. A hard plastic jerkbait, a soft plastic jerkbait, something like topwater and a chatterbait. Those things work well together. You can use a Texas rig, and you can even use something like a spinnerbait, right? If you want to replace that chatterbait with something like this, you see that those bass are still moving around, chasing bait, chasing those minnows. Well, something like this can be very, very good at that, because like we've said before, this is basically a little school of minnows, and that's what the bass are interested in. So don't be afraid to try new things, change things up. As we've talked about, keep things fresh, keep things rolling, but always bear in mind that you want to have a 1-2 punch. Even when one bait is working, make sure you have something secondary to follow it up with that's going to pair well with what it is that you're using. Like, I'm not going to be using a lipless crank and a noisy square bill, or a shallow diving crankbait. I won't use those two together. They're too similar to me. They don't really, change things up as much as I would like them to. I feel limited. And that's basically what I mean. I want to be able to cover as many situations as possible by using as little gear as I possibly can. So if you keep that in mind, I know when you go out on the water, you'll have great success. So there you have it. My tips and tricks for getting those bass to reveal themselves to you when you're in a particular area, so you know if you're fishing empty water or not. And a good way to locate those bass on your fishery, given the time of year, where to look, where to start looking, the types of places that we want to target. But most importantly, having two types of baits that complement each other, that work well together, so we're getting the most bang for our buck and maximizing our efficiency on the water. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.